Hello and welcome to Unparliamentary Language, a podcast that can tell the difference between a work meeting and a party. How are you, Rob?
I'm not prepared to.
Been at any work meetings recently?
No, I'm not prepared to answer that question until Sue Gray has had a say. So I think I happily move on from that question if you don't mind.
Speaking of that question, I think we should move straight into our headlines. So we have a few here, but they're all about what we've just alluded to. So Downing It Street from the Metro. Is the party over for the PM from the Daily Mail? And defiant PM refuses to quit as polls slip further from the Times. This is one of those topics where it almost doesn't need any introduction, but we might have listeners abroad who aren't, haven't got their pulse on the British news cycle, but we did touch on it a bit last time. It just keeps getting worse, doesn't it?
Yeah. So, I moved into the headline section and you can't really avoid what's been going on over the past couple of days. We mentioned last time out that Boris Johnson was in a bit of hot water about alleged parties that happened at Number 10 and had been able to sort of wriggle his way out of being directly involved in any of them, but still had certainly taken the political flak for what was going on. And we mentioned that it was the first time that the Conservatives were really consistently below Labour in the polls as he really started taking a hit from these allegations of Christmas parties, etc., etc. The big news that broke this week was that during May of 2020, an email went out in Downing Street sent to over 100 staff inviting them to a social event in the garden of Number 10 Downing Street, where they could bring their own bottle with the view that they could enjoy the nice weather that we were all having. The big thing about this is not only was it, a social event in Number 10 where they're bringing their own alcohol, which sounds a little bit strange. It was during that first lockdown where the guidance was that, the guidance for the general public, at least, was that you're only allowed to meet outside with one other person from another household, and mostly for exercise purposes or something like that. So the thought that while basically there were people that couldn't go to funerals, there were people that had to watch their loved ones in hospital over Zoom and couldn't have that physical contact, juxtaposed to that you had the staff of Number 10 Downing Street in the garden having what is essentially not work at all but a very social party, and one that it was essentially alleged that Boris Johnson must have known about, because you can't have 100 people in your garden and not realise what's going on. And yes, those allegations grew and grew to the point where the PM was reluctant to say anything. His defence before Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday was that a civil servant called Sue Gray was investigating everything, and he wouldn't confirm if he had been to this party or not until Sue Gray had released it, which is a bit daft, because people said that, you can, surely or not, your refusal to say yes or no makes me think that you probably did go to this thing if you're being so evasive about it, because if you didn't, you would just say no and quash the allegations straight away. But the fact he was being so evasive led to a lot of questioning from the general public, and the heat started to grow, and that's where you get the Downing It Street and is the party over for the PM kind of headlines coming out as the pressure really racked up. So comes to yesterday for PMQs. Did you watch PMQs at all yesterday? Was it one that I sort of wanted to sit down with some popcorn and watch?
Oh, I fully understand. I just was not available because I was in work. I didn't see it for work reasons, but it's one of those ones where I had people being like, "Ooh, I've got lunch and I'm watching PMQs," from people who do not generally follow politics. So definitely it was one to watch, and it's a shame I missed it. But, in the middle of the workday on a Wednesday, I can be quite busy.
Yeah. No, that's fair. It was in my lunch hour, so I was able to, put some time aside and go, right, I'll listen to this. Just kind of with a premise of, I think he's banged to rights here. What on earth is he going to say, and how is he going to wriggle out of this one? So here we go. Here's the statement. Mr. Speaker, I want to apologise. I know that millions of people across this country have made extraordinary sacrifices over the last 18 months. I know the anguish that they have been through, unable to mourn their relatives, unable to live their lives as they want or do the things they love. And I know the rage they feel with me and my government I lead when they think that in Downing Street itself the rules are not being properly followed by the people who make the rules. And though I cannot anticipate the conclusions of the current inquiry, I have learnt enough to know there were things we simply did not get right, and I must take responsibility. Number 10 is a big department with the garden as an extension of the office, which has been in constant use because of the role of fresh air in stopping the virus. And when I went into the garden just after 6 on the 20th of May 2020 to thank groups of staff before going back to my office 25 minutes later to continue working, I believed implicitly that this was a work event. But Mr. Speaker, with hindsight, I should have sent everyone back inside. I should have found some other way to thank them, and I should have recognised that even if it could be said technically to fall within the guidance, there would be millions and millions of people who simply would not see it that way. People who suffered terribly, people who were forbidden from meeting loved ones at all, inside or outside. It is to them and to this House I offer my heartfelt apologies. And all I ask is that Sue Gray be allowed to complete her inquiry into that day and several others so that the full facts can be established, and I will of course come back to the House and make a statement. So that's it in full. Convinced? Yeah? We can just walk away from that and say, yeah, that's a good apology. Well done,
Not
Boris.
at all convinced.
No. Which bits of that apology, you can see me doing the bunny ears around that word, which parts of that apology are you unhappy with or think are maybe less than satisfactory?
I mean, most of it, but like the two specific things I think jump out is that thinking this was a work event as if that somehow changed things. Because like I wasn't allowed to go to the university at the time. Like, you know, it's not like I appreciate that, you know, some people in the government had to continue working because it was a crisis situation. I don't think anyone would dispute that. But the idea that this was a work event, like that whole thing where he's like, I couldn't tell this was a party. I thought it was a work event. And then the bit where he's like, oh, in hindsight, I should have done this. Like, what is obvious? Like, it's not in hindsight, is it? Like, you knew that at the time. Like, I don't believe that bit for a second, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Those are irritating bits. What was it? The bit I should have recognised that even if it could be said that technically it fell within the guidance. So it was kind of like he seems to be saying there, actually, if you really look at it, maybe I haven't done anything wrong and we're all getting a big fuss over nothing. But I still realise that I've got to say sorry because millions of people were upset with me, so I guess I'll say sorry. And those were some of the arguments that the other side of the House were throwing at Boris Johnson in what was quite a bizarre PMQs, where Conservatives on one side of the House were asking him questions about plastic bits that go in washing machines, dinosaur fossils, and I can't remember what else. It was like job centres or whatever. Oh, and a policy to ban the BBC licence fee was what was coming from the Conservative side. Meanwhile, from Labour, the SNP, the Lib Dems, anybody else on the opposite side of the House, it was basically, why don't you just resign, Prime Minister? We're not stupid. The work meeting thing was brought up as something where he said, like, essentially you're treating us for fools, thinking that you were unable to identify this as a party, and particularly the fact that there is a paper trail, that there is an email that comes out encouraging people to bring their own bottles, and that it is advertised as a social event in that email makes it all the more clearer to everyone in that situation that they feel it's a party. And even though Boris Johnson has said that he didn't receive that email himself, it's a bit worrying that he was able to misconstrue the situation. If, as leader of our government, as you know, as our head of state in that sense, he should be able to recognise just the difference between those two things. And yeah, the other thing that maybe is kind of infuriating, or maybe where the real rub of this thing lies, or what his cabinet ministers have now gone out and said, and what appears to be the big line from everybody, is wait for what Sue Gray is going to say. Wait for everything. The defence from the Conservatives at the moment is that people are making a lot of assumptions about what's going on. We've got the best person in the world. Apparently Sue Gray is a mixture of Batman and Poirot in her detective abilities, or at least that's what people have her lead us to believe, and that she will comment on this and won't hold back. People think that she will tell the truth, but it might be the case that as she is a civil servant that works under the Prime Minister and the way that these reports are written, it might be unlikely that she actually directly implements the Prime Minister in this whole thing, and might say, yes, he attended on the fringes, but this is more about, I don't know, a drinking culture or a social culture within Number 10 that is damaging, rather than her saying that you broke the rules and should resign. That's not her role in this inquiry, to call for the Prime Minister to resign. And even in that role, she's a civil servant, much along the lines of Lord Geit, the guy who had to investigate Boris Johnson's flat renovation. He can report to the Prime Minister, and then the Prime Minister can just dismiss that report anyway, because that's who he's reporting to. And the Prime Minister says, oh, that's a nice suggestion, I'll ignore that, much like he did with the Priti Patel bullying case, and that ended up with that civil servant resigning. So even though there is this line from the Conservatives about wait for the report, and it seems effective in one sense in the fact that Labour are like, of course we want to know the true facts, we will wait for the report, and this is meant to come out at earliest by next week. The fact that this report might be watered down in a sense, or might not be the hit job that the opposition want, is where Boris Johnson's defence lies. It's not a great defence. I think, in fact, that apology has made a lot of people at Darn site angrier, but it might give him the time to wriggle out of this and not have to resign as a matter of principle. Not that, I don't know. And in your opinion, is there any situation in which Boris Johnson would willingly give up power, or does he have to be pushed by his party instead?
I mean, I think we've discussed it before, and I get the impression that he's going to cling on to it as much as he can. Like, he'd have to be pushed. I mean, we've made jokes before Christmas about, letters from the 1922 committee and things like that.
I think it feels more real than that stuff that was going on before Christmas, as you have some MPs in apparent open revolt. The cabinet is still behind him, clearly, because after that statement, they slowly kind of trickled out with the same. There's a way things are done now. You'll see them all posting a certain statement on Twitter, or they'll go out in the news one by one and repeat the same party line. And this is definitely what was happening with all cabinet members, bar one, who might be worth mentioning, Rishi Sunak, who said, yes, I believe the PM apologised, but refused to go on with the we must wait for Sue Gray, that kind of stuff, which makes some people believe that Rishi is clearly one of the next ones in line.
I think I'll have to find the tweet to put in the show notes, but there was a tweet along the lines of, it took him 8 hours to formulate a tweet that wasn't clearly attacking the Prime Minister while also distancing himself, or something along those lines. It's like, it was very much like, oh, I've been doing this thing. Also, by the way, something Prime Minister. And so, yeah, I mean, we've talked about Rishi Sunak before. People call him Dishy Rishi. People have goodwill towards him because of the furlough scheme, etc. So I think he probably is in quite a strong position. But as we know, once the Conservative Party starts electing a new leader, round and round it goes, and where it ends up, nobody knows. Like, the time before Boris was selected leader, when he was in the running before Theresa May got selected, I mean, I would have put money on him probably at that point. I didn't, because I don't tend to gamble, but he was out within like a day. So these things, often the person you think might do well disappears quite early on because they don't have quite the right connections. It's not quite the time for them. But yeah, Rishi Sunak definitely is on the list of people are kind of floating as a possible contender.
Yeah, I think the one thing I want to do just to wrap up this section is say that even if the Conservatives don't act right now, and if the report is watered down slightly, what this has done in the short term is it's created an awful lot of bad PR around the Conservative Party. I think that excuse of, I didn't know it was a party, I thought it was a work meeting, is something that is penetrating the public consciousness. So I think I mentioned last time how, like, the fact that Ant and Dec were talking about the parties on I'm a Celebrity, that means something. I don't think they would have talked about wallpaper and flat renovations on I'm a Celebrity, but this story is one that's permeating into the general public and making Boris Johnson look particularly bad. Like, even Holly and Phil on This Morning were going to cover the PMQs on Wednesday. And if you're reaching those sort of people and having a negative impact, and people see that statement and just instinctively don't believe it or think it's a weak excuse, it's going to have an impact on his approval ratings. And it's already proving to be quite the vote loser appears in the polls. The Conservatives are now losing to Labour by 10 points, according to the latest YouGov poll, which is quite the drop. In the short term, it appears to be having a big effect on Boris Johnson and the Conservatives in the polls. A YouGov poll put the Conservatives 10 points behind Labour, which is certainly a worry. Maybe the big thing to take from those polls is the fact that Labour aren't necessarily gaining all the lost Conservative votes, they tend to be going to the Lib Dems, the Greens, and maybe a bit of Reform. But it's never a good sign to see a party that was, the Conservative Party that we thought was untouchable halfway through 2021, now to be languishing 10 points behind in the polls purely because of it. Because of Boris, because of an own goal. I think if he wasn't doing this, then they'd certainly still be ahead and people would be, people would still be entrenched in their old views. I feel like Labour supporters would still support Labour and there would be nothing to shake Conservatives from their original view because Boris Johnson keeps storing these own goals and is unwilling to move or properly apologise for what he's done. That's why he's starting to leak votes. And the only cure for him maybe is time and hoping this will all blow over. But I think, as frustrating as it is, all we can do as political commentators at the moment is wait for the outcome of the Sue Gray report and see if it is more damning than we think or if it's a bit of a whitewash. I do think that will determine the next moves within the House of Commons, at least, to see if this story develops any further.
So the point I just wanted to add on there was you mentioned the polls, and I just brought them up. So we spoke kind of middle December, and Labour were ahead of the Conservatives. They've kept that lead of 6%. I think it was about that much when we last spoke. But there's definitely been a bit of a shift to the Lib Dems and Conservative. Like in the last few weeks, the Lib Dems have taken a few percentage points, and Conservatives are starting to drop down even further, which is not uncommon. But the one thing I wanted to add is I think there's often been a lot of talk about how effective is Keir Starmer in PMQs, etc. And I think the fact that he was calling on Boris Johnson to resign yesterday in the PMQs was there has to be a line at which you start calling out the opposition, and people have often said Keir Starmer should have called out Boris over things in a less measured way, more like obviously calling him out and calling on him to resign yesterday. The general impression I get is that was what people wanted to see, and it was maybe that is a turning point for Starmer a bit because he's kind of felt a bit like, especially through all the COVID stuff, Labour have generally been like, oh well, we broadly agree, but we think you should go further, and that's not a very good soundbite. Like even if it's a sensible thing to say, it's kind of very much not felt like they've been opposition a lot of the time, whereas that was a much better chance for him to say, oh look, you've done the bad thing, resign. And the fact that he is a lawyer kind of helps back that up a bit as well.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that point. I don't know if Keir Starmer's been playing this game where I might be generalising Jeremy Corbyn too much here, but to compare him directly with the previous Labour leader, I think Jeremy Corbyn would have gone into that chamber and told Boris Johnson to resign every single week if he could. Because of the bad things that have been going on. And there are some people that certainly feel that way. But if you do it every week, then it kind of loses its impact if you're saying it every week, doesn't it? You'd ask him to resign for anything. The fact that Keir Starmer has been quite reserved about using those terms, and yesterday was the first time he was like, right, now I've had enough. Now I'm going to call for you to resign because I don't see how you can get out of this situation. And that was the feeling on Wednesday anyway. When I went into PMQs, I was thinking, Boris Johnson is going to have a stonking excuse to get out of this one. And in my opinion, he didn't, but was only able to buy himself some time. The fact that there is such a unified front as well between everybody on the opposition benches that they think Boris Johnson should resign clearly shows that this is a big moment for Boris Johnson personally. But if you want to get rid of him, if you think that he won't last as Prime Minister for very much longer, those calls need to be coming from the back benches and behind Boris Johnson as well. Otherwise, it's just an opposition doing their job and wanting the current government out of control. There's no way that they can get. There's no way that Labour can enact anything to get rid of Boris Johnson. It's all on him or on the Conservative Party to act now.
So I think we had to spend some time dealing with that. It's an ongoing story, as we said, but I mean, this week has been full of revelations, so it had to be touched on, and the polls mentioned. We'll come back to those more fully at the end, I think. But this episode, we're going into our main headline. We don't have a headline. This is going to be our usual review of last year / predictions for next year episode, a bit later than doing it at the start of January, but been a stressful year. So we're going to go in, and I think we have gone through and picked out all the various bits that we predicted last year. We're going to see how well we did and make predictions for next year. So I guess we should start off with coronavirus, and I already see us being kind of wrong. So that's great. So the first thing we said last year about coronavirus was it would be not normal until Easter at least, which I guess technically is not true because of the way technically is true because of the way that's phrased. But yeah, I mean, it did open up a bit around Easter. I got my vaccine second jab at the very start of the Easter holidays, and I went to the pub with work colleagues outside 14 days later, because that was like I was definitely not going to go outside until I knew the vaccine was properly like bedded in outside of the normal, restrictions we had for work where I would wear a mask and stuff. Yeah, so I think we had what felt like a fairly normal summer with everyone getting vaccinated. It was just very hopeful, wasn't it? So I guess we were kind of, we had our nose on the money about when that would start to feel reasonably normal. But then, unfortunately, we couldn't predict Omicron. So here we are.
Yeah, what is normal? Big question mark about that. I think we did all right with that. The last one's interesting because we've the next one's interesting. So the next one we said is that the lockdown we were going through last year, we said that would be the last major lockdown that we felt that the government would struggle to introduce another one. And that was true. Like, we didn't go into, there was no, if you remember all the tiers that we had at the end of...
Yeah, we haven't had any of that. We've just had a vague, maybe you should wear a mask a bit more kind of thing. And it's unclear how well that's being followed right now.
Yes, but at least there was certainly maybe a growing case or a suspicion that we may go into lockdown at the end of 2021 because of the new variant. But it appears that even the government didn't have the political capital to get that through the House of Parliament as they want, or they didn't have the want to do that anyway. Like my personal opinion on Omicron is that we have got extraordinarily lucky that it was milder than other variants of the disease, given how much of the population appears to have been like the way that the infection rate really did go up towards the end of this year. Imagine if that had been Delta or OG COVID, as I'll call it. Like, I don't think that would have been sustainable, and I think health services certainly would have been overwhelmed if we had that level with a much stronger variant. We've just got quite lucky that we chanced our arm and went, oh, this one's far less, we've had the vaccine now, and it appears to be less effective than other variants in hospitalizing people and killing them. Therefore, we might not have to go to the same level of restrictions. But yes, I do think there may have been we didn't really factor variants into our last year's conversation.
Yeah, I think my general feeling was things would get better on that. Like, it wasn't that I wasn't thinking there might not be a variant, but more that I think that was around the time I'd first listened to the very excellent podcast episode by This Podcast Might Kill You about how generally viruses get less deadly as they continue. So I think I'd already heard that, and I was kind of mildly confident, but I don't think I just stated it on the air, as it were. So yeah, I think that's their mask wearing and social distancing to stay. They did briefly get rid of it over summer, kind of a bit, except not in all cases. So I think we've got that for a while longer.
I think it's going to be a winter thing at least, isn't it? Like, particularly mask wearing and stuff. But yeah.
Next one down was we might go to a wedding. And in fact, I went to quite a few because everyone was fitting them in over summer. And in fact, we went to a wedding together. So yeah, that was spot on.
We're not married to each other, just to make that clear. Yeah, but yeah.
No, to be clear. But no, we went to a wedding where both of us and our partners were present. So yeah, that was good. Vaccine rollout, unsure, might be slow. I'm not exactly sure what's meant there. It did take a little while to pick up, and then it was actually quite impressive.
Yeah, I think back in the time we had no idea how quick our vaccine rollout would be compared to other countries, but it's the general wisdom that we've been quite good, at least, at targeting those people that need it most and getting it rolled out to the majority of the population. We haven't really seen a slowdown or any worries that vaccines weren't going to be able to be provided fast enough because of logistics issues. We've seemed to have got past that as well. So yeah, I think that was, we were wary. Neither of us had a first vaccine when we discussed this last year, and now I have had 3 and maybe fourthed by whenever this comes out. So yeah, I think that was a good prediction to get wrong in a slight way. The fact that the vaccine rollout did appear to go so well.
And then our final point there is we weren't sure about summer holidays abroad. I mean, I think, well, neither of us went on a summer holiday abroad. I did one in Scotland, but that's very much down to personal choice. I don't know any close friends and family who went on a summer holiday abroad. I know a few people who have done people who've gone to see family and stuff, and I know a few cases of people who've gone on holidays at different times of the year because of maybe they had vouchers to use up or they had some money for a holiday that needed to be used in a particular time frame. But I think the vast majority of people did not take a summer holiday abroad or any holiday abroad this year. out of the people I know. And I think there was generally like more staycations and things like that, or, just taking a week off to be at home away from work, but, using up your holiday. And I think this year businesses have been a bit more, you have to use your holiday, because I know some people who are kind of forced to take all their holiday and during the lockdown last year at Christmas because, you haven't taken enough holiday this year because no one was really prepared for it. And in general, I think that worked itself out. Whereas this year, people are like, well, you should still take holiday, just because you're working from home. I think that's kind of more normalized. So yeah, we were unsure. So I guess it's technically a win for us, but it was possible for people to go on some holidays abroad. So that was how we did. Generally pretty well, I'd say, given how slippery something like the coronavirus pandemic had been. I mean, obviously, if we'd made those predictions in 2020, we didn't predict anything about coronavirus. So the fact that we'd lived with it for a year gave us a bit more of an insight. Any predictions you want to make on coronavirus going forward? I mean, I think we both are in agreement, right, that this is essentially here to stay for some point. There's various numbers being bandied around, but I think I can say that we're not going to be sat here next year going, oh, coronavirus is completely gone. But I personally feel we're translating from a pandemic to an endemic thing, and it's just going to be how we manage that.
Yes, yeah. The government has said pretty much out loud now that they are moving on to a phase where they see where we can live with coronavirus rather than go into the state that we were, where there were, the lockdowns and tiers. The fact that the government has had that reaction at the end of 2021 where they decided not to lock down for COVID, and the fact that so many of their own MPs were voting against that kind of stuff anyway, I think confirms to me that it would have to take a extremely strong variant to pop up somewhere and prove itself to be particularly deadly for them to enforce a lockdown. If that doesn't happen, then I feel that things like working from home mandates and mask wearing and social distancing in certain situations, those rules will still apply. I think you'll still have some places where it'll be like, you can go indoors but open all the windows and, go outside if you can. And I certainly think that our summers are going to be better than our winters. But yes, touching wood and crossing all my fingers here, but I don't think it'll be a return to the very strict lockdowns of 2019 in the coming year. I hope, and it is my sincerest hope, that for 2022, although COVID isn't going away at all, and we should still be wary and responsible and do lateral flow tests when possible, so we can be making sure that we're not spreading it as much as possible, that we will go back to not completely normal, but edging towards that more like, hey, I can actually see people again and do stuff outside. So yeah, that's my prediction for coronavirus for 2022. A feature that I really hope that we're not doing again in 2023, if possible.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to be able to put it to one side, but like I said, I think as it switches to becoming endemic, I think maybe my other prediction is, and I think it's a fairly easy one, judging by how like Israel is doing things, but I think at least another booster is going to be on the cards for most people. So I feel fairly confident making that. I don't know if we're going to move to, like, you get to a point where it becomes more of a flu-like problem. I'm not saying that coronavirus and flu are the same thing, but that it becomes a problem like that where you have to deal with it every winter maybe. And like, there are so many questions that are unanswered here. We don't know if it's like flu does this thing where it basically goes away over summer and then it comes back in the winter and it has mutated. Do we end up with coronavirus basically becoming like a slightly worse flu in that way? I don't know. But like, I think, that's something that is basically impossible to predict. And people who are doing all sorts of modeling are probably, doing worst case and best case scenarios on that. But I think my feeling is that it's probably going to be like that for a while. Like as we, you get to a point where possibly everyone has had it or been vaccinated against it. But as we know, that dies off fairly quickly, similar to how like your ability to handle the flu dies off because the flu changes so much. So I think, I think we're going to be stuck with it for a while, but specific predictions really hard to make, I guess, in that regard. So next up, it's our perennial topic. The reason the podcast started, the Brexit process. Quite a few things in there, actually. So the first one up was Brexit vote to be passed.
Yeah, so at the start of last year, there was still, although Boris Johnson had got his agreement through and won the election, there was still a vote to happen both in the Commons and the EU just to sign off the final bits of paperwork. And unsurprisingly, with a majority of 70, it did pass. But I think we were fairly sure that the shenanigans under Theresa May and the political deadlock of the past wouldn't happen again. And so I'm fairly happy to be right in that sense. Maybe the next ones we're less right on.
The next ones kind of go together as a group, but I guess there are some complications that we can talk about. So the overarching title here is Brexit Reality to Hit, which I think it's kind of split down Brexit vote lines. I don't think a lot of people who voted for Brexit are looking too hard at the bad bits. On Reddit, on Leopards Ate My Face, and on other subreddits, which there's one about, like, Brexit Schadenfreude, I don't think it's called that, but, there are definitely people suddenly waking up to problems. Like, people are, oh no, we're going to they're going to charge us for traveling to Europe for like visas. And it's like, yeah, because we're not in the EU anymore. What did you expect? But whether that's hit home on a broad scale, I don't think so. And I think the big problem there is it's tied in with all the problems around the pandemic as well. So it's, it's very easy at the moment to say like, we had all those shipping problems, and we're still going through a different type of shipping crisis now, varying degrees of problem. And I think that's the problem. The waters have been muddied. And I think I said this last year to some extent, or I've definitely said it at some point on this podcast, but it is a shame we don't have a world without, firstly, it's a shame we don't have a world without coronavirus, but it's definitely, I feel ashamed that we didn't have that, like, here's what Brexit did, very clear cut. And it's always going to be hard to pick apart now, which means it's hard. Not that I want to be like, oh, we told you so, but also it would be good to be like, look, here's what you voted for and why it was bad. Because I think part of the reason the Conservatives have managed to hold a strong position in the polls is because people didn't really see the negative effects as Brexit related, because they could blame it on other things.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Although there are some things that are starting to come through. I've linked to a BBC article there about sort of prices going up and businesses 1 year on going, yeah, we have seen a marked impact from Brexit. And I know that there was you get those press releases from financial think tanks that say, oh, actually Brexit has cost us so many billions. So it appears that there is a very real economic cost at the moment, but it's one, as you said, it's slow to come through, and it's very easy for both the government and the public to put those economic problems as COVID problems because they remember the lockdowns, the need to furlough, the industries like the tourism industry, the hospitality industry that were hit very severely by it. They might have also been exacerbated by the fact that there was Brexit going on as well, and the fact that we'd left the EU, but that's very hard to prove because, as you said, it's all tied in together. I think, yeah, so that's where I think we were both right and wrong on that point. I'm going to give us a half win on that. The other bit is kind of funny to me. This is my naive blue sky thinking.
Having just seen your addendum here, yes, amuses me too. Yeah.
So yeah, we said that maybe now we've left the EU, the government will have to find another scapegoat for our problems. They can't just blame the EU for everything, and maybe that's what COVID has become. Maybe the government, when they've been saying why are prices rising, why are they doing that, why are taxes rising to pay for these things? They say, well, we've got to pay for the furlough scheme and all the money we put into the health service. We've got to pay for that somehow, and that's because of COVID. But also, the government at every moment possible when they didn't like something about the deal, or sausages couldn't get to Northern Ireland, or fish weren't doing, although the fish were clearly happier being British fish, as Jacob Rees-Mogg said, there were problems in the fishing industry. It appears that our government has still been threatening to trigger Article 16 every other week, and threatening to renegotiate that Brexit deal that, as we mentioned at the start of this section, a Brexit deal that they voted to pass and were all very happy with it at the time. So yes, I think I was maybe naive in my assumption that we would stop blaming the EU. Tensions have certainly been high at points. Sabres have been rattled, but so far it seems like mostly a war of words to keep Brexiteers within the Conservative Party happy, and people who voted Brexit happy that the EU's still up to no good, rather than any actual serious action on behalf of the government. And maybe epitomised by the fact that Lord Frost, the Brexit negotiator, resigned this year and took away rather quite like a large, a lot of his work had been going in to try and possibly renegotiating parts of that deal. The fact that he was so willing to walk away from it and give it to Liz Truss of all people might show that the government might have put that down its list of priorities, and that's yet to be seen.
Slightly surprising, but also not surprising, I guess. But yeah, we definitely put the wrong vote down there, I guess. So yeah, one in the wrong column for us. what are our predictions for Brexit going forwards? I mean, we've officially left now, so I think there's probably less to go in this category.
No, you're absolutely right. Like, my point was going to be that we'll talk about it less, and I think both of the major parties will talk about it less if possible. I think the Conservatives talk about it less because there are fewer good things that are coming out of Brexit. There aren't many Brexit wins that they can point to. Like, the biggest thing that's been going around at the moment is that we can put the crown mark on pint glasses, which apparently is something that we could have done with the EU before, but they needed the EU logo on there as well. But there, in the meantime, in the short term, that the government has fewer Brexit wins, so it's not bringing it up as much. And as we mentioned last year, and maybe we'll get on to when we were talking about Labour, Brexit was an extraordinarily divisive issue for Labour, and Keir Starmer's bold decision has been to ignore it and not talk about it at all. And that's kind of worked for him. And, the issue of Europe and Brexit is now fading into the background like it did before 2015, where nobody but a small group of Conservative MPs really cared for it. So it might be the case, much like I said, that, hey, we might not be talking about COVID next year. It might be the fact that we might not be talking about Brexit next year, which is kind of weird when you open the segment with kind of the reason that we exist, kind of the reason that we felt we needed to talk about politics was those years between 2015 and 2020 when every other conversation, everything in Parliament seemed to be stuck with this issue of, we voted for Brexit, now how do we get it done? Now it's done, even though I think there will be real economic impacts. And those might come through in the cost of living crisis, which is something that the Conservatives are going to have to deal with in the coming year. I think maybe the B word won't be brought up as much, and both sides will try and paint it as other economic forces working against them rather than anything to do with the EU. But yeah, we'll wait and see on that point. I don't know if you've got anything to add on where you think Brexit is going over the next year.
No, I mean, nothing particularly. I think I don't think it's trying to work out how to word this. Is there's another show I listen to where they do predictions, but they're very litigious about, they've got to the point where they stand up to not the national anthem, to their show anthem, and read out a list of rules. And I don't want to go that far, but I do want to get my wording right so that I can try and judge this next year, because a few of these have been a little vague. I think it's fair to say we will continue to see more of the problems, especially the kind of ones businesses are facing, and that will be an undercurrent for this year. Will it be super big news stories? No, but the kind of thing we might discuss in our headlines from time to time. So that's what I think. Brexit has moved from being a regular main feature to being something that will be generally in occasional headlines, but from our viewpoint. I think there's still more problems to happen, but most of the big stuff has happened, and it's more going to be as coronavirus goes away, maybe there'll be a chance for the negative effects to be spotlighted more in the media if it proves an interesting story. So, it'll be shipping crisis stuff, that kind of things. If food prices go up substantially and it's proven that it's more to do with Brexit than other things, I'm sure, I'm sure, this is not a prediction, but wouldn't be surprised if Wetherspoons ends up in the news again for some terrible hiring practice, or saying, oh no, we should hire all these people from abroad, even though they were the people who campaigned for us to leave in the first place, which has happened this year at least once. I wouldn't be surprised, judging by how Wetherspoons is run, that something like that comes up. But let's not call that a prediction, just a kind of general vibe. And I think hopefully, I would like to talk about Brexit less, but I also think we have kind of as a podcast that started basically due to us chatting about Brexit together. I think it would be nice for us to have a chance to maybe do a retrospective or something, but that's us making a story out of something, not necessarily something that's going to be grabbing headlines for other people.
Totally. I'm going to add one quick caveat. That is, if the government does decide to trigger Article 16, that's probably going to be something very big that we would need to cover. But it is.
Yes, definitely. I'm not ruling out the possibility of a big news story. I'm just saying my guess is there won't be one. I feel like they would much rather have a thing to threaten, because like you discussed, it's a way to be and get that certain base behind them again. So I think they'd rather just have it as a hypothetical nuke as opposed to a real thing. So moving on, Conservatives. We've talked about them a bit at the top of the show? Well, I mean, the number one prediction is still right, I guess. He didn't do it. The top one is Boris needs to work on party unity. So I mean, he does still need to work on party unity. That's not a guess. There's a bit more under this. So can't afford any more gaffes. Needs to show he is competent as a leader. I mean, that's all true, but I don't think that's a prediction. That's just a general statement of fact.
I think, yeah, I was listening to this. I had to laugh at this section when I was listening back to it today, because it was like, you know what, Boris has had a rough. He's had a rough time as leader this year, and I don't think I was like, he's one big gaff away from ruining this thing for himself. So he's got to sort of buckle down and be a good Boris. But now he's got rid of Dominic Cummings. Hey, maybe he's going to turn the corner. So I don't know whether to put this up as like right or spectacularly wrong, or an underestimation of how much Boris Johnson can do stuff where it completely explodes in his face. So yes, I think all of those points remain to be true, and when we go into our predictions of the future, they will be even truer. But yes, I think we can move on to the next bit pretty swiftly, actually.
I don't really have much more to say on that, I don't think. Yeah, I mean, getting rid of Dominic Cummings didn't help at all. It's just a thing to note. But yeah, I mean, I think we thought there was something going on there, but seems like having him on the outside where he can just throw stories out has not helped Boris at all. The next thing I would say is essentially correct. We said the Conservatives would go up in the polls if vaccines go well, but if mishandled, it would be not so good. And I think there definitely was a vaccine bump. I think we've discussed it a few times over the last year. So I think that's true. We said it needed to be better than other countries, but yeah, that's also a thing that, like we said earlier, our vaccine rollout was pretty fast, as it turned out, and that's probably part of the reason they went up in the polls at the time. Next one down, we'll focus on levelling up and the North. I know quite a few Northerners, and I don't think any of them would agree that happened this year, so I think that's a bad prediction on our front. I think that was the thing they should have done 100%, but they just didn't. Cancelling of bits of HS2 and a few other things, I think that's a miss.
Yes, no, I think it's a miss. I think the Conservatives said levelling up an awful lot in speeches, but actually doing things about it, they didn't do much, and as you said, was disappointed people with their plans for like railways up in the north, etc., etc. So yeah, I would agree that it's been a bad prediction in that sense.
Yeah. What else is there? Oh yes. Then we made a prediction about the budget, saying they'll need to try and get some money back after all that spending, and yeah, I mean that was correct. I think we probably touched on that in our budget episode, but yeah. More taxation and
more taxation than more taxation, but more taxation than I expected. Like everybody's saying how this is one of like the highest taxes we've had post World War II now to try and get money back into the economy, and that's come from a Conservative government. We covered it in our podcast where some people described it as the death knell of conservatism. That this was, is this truly a Conservative government if they are taxing so high? So yeah, I think they've gone far more extreme than I would have predicted, but maybe that's a sign to how extreme the budget deficit was as a result of trying to fund COVID, and maybe, as we mentioned before, maybe Brexit's got a slight role to play in that need for cash as well.
And then our hubris to think such a thing. The final one under the Conservatives, they will be a bit less culture warsy, which is an odd phrase, but yeah. I don't think they've stopped that at all. I think like the concept of the culture war as a political tool is here to stay, unfortunately. I wish it wasn't.
Yeah. But it was a naive prediction. My prediction was kind of like, now Cummings has gone and Boris Johnson is interested in being popular and a nice guy, he will, abandon this need to be in a permanent culture war and will try and be a unifying figure for the country. And that's how he's going to do that by being nice, cuddly 2012 London Olympics Boris rather than Brexity Boris. And I don't think that's happened at all. You are right. Like appointing Nadine Dorries as culture secretary was a pretty inflammatory thing to say, like, hey, no, the culture wars are here to stay. I'm appointing somebody who is blatantly anti-BBC and pro all of these other things that would rile up his base. Now, I don't know if he's done that as he's got slightly less popular and feels that he needs to at least pump up its base, because that's why you inflame the culture wars, because you are trying to enliven your base rather than appeal to everybody broadly. You abandon that feeling of unity and say, no, I believe I can continue winning if I have a very committed group of people who are very passionate about something, and that's what keeps them voting Conservative. So yeah, another one wrong, another one in which we overestimated what Boris could do, and where maybe he'd be able to bring the Conservative back to a certain level of, I'm not saying Theresa May's was more of a cuddly Conservative government or like David Cameron's, but I think you could see that the Conservative Party were moving further to the right under Boris Johnson. I expected them to move closer to the centre this year, and although some might say that taxation has moved them further to the left or further back to the centre, economically, culturally, I think they are still firmly a party where the social agenda is on the right and continues to be so.
Next was Labour.
Do we want to do what we think about Conservatives for next year?
Oh, yeah. Yes. Sorry.
That's right.
Sorry. There's been a lot going on.
It's okay.
People are thinking about things. Sorry, I just also hit my microphone. Well, I guess that's what overall maybe 50-50 on the prediction. But I guess we have to make our predictions for the Conservatives next year. I mean, I suppose the big one. Do you think we'll have Boris this time next year? I think that needs to be predicted now. I mean, I know we just had a whole thing about how we have to wait for this inquiry, but given the situation we're in now, I think we need to make a decision one way or the other.
Okay, so it's really hard to. It's obviously like really hard, yay or nay. If it was anybody else other than Boris, I would say yeah, they're probably gone. If Theresa May was in this situation, yes, she's gone. She wasn't liked well enough within the party, and I'm not thinking that Boris Johnson is particularly liked within his own party at the moment. The one thing that he's always had going for him is that he wins elections, and what's happened this year is that they've lost 2 seats to the Lib Dems in quite humiliating fashion. One of them, that seat of Paterson, where they lost, it was Conservative for 1,000 years before the Lib Dems rocked up and did a swing that would make Jon Snow or Peter Snow, whoever did the swingometer, make one of the Snows, I guess it's Jeremy Vine who does it now, but it would make Jeremy Vine very excited to show that swing on the swingometer in that by-election. I don't think Boris will go after the Sue Gray report. I believe that he will hang on, but we do have local elections this year in March, and if the results of those are also spectacularly bad, like the Conservatives don't pick up anything and they're losing councils left, right and centre because people are using them as a protest vote against Boris. People are very good at protesting against the Conservatives. In fact, in the council elections, the ones before Theresa May went, that was when the Conservatives were the 5th most voted for party or something, behind Labour and the Lib Dems and the Brexit Party and the Greens. They had an absolutely awful night, and that really shook people's confidence, thinking that this Theresa May, she's not leading a Conservative Party that wins elections. That's what we're here to do. We need to get rid quickly. So I think that if it's going to happen, it'll be after those council elections. Is he going to be in power by the end of 2022? I'm going to be a coward and I'm going to say yes. I'm going to say it's going to be really hard to unseat Boris Johnson, and he tends to have he's not affected by the same political gravity that other people are. Will the country and the polls be happy about that? Probably no. I don't think he's suddenly going to become a likeable, cuddly Boris. I think those days are over, and I think he might become quite an embattled prime minister surrounded only by his most loyal cabinet members who try and keep him in power. But I don't think he is one to give up willingly, and I'm not quite sure that the Conservative Party quite have it in them yet to put those letters in and sink the dagger in, and things get catastrophically bad for him. I'm
just going to go out on the limb and just say I think he's going this year. That's what I'm going to say. I don't disagree with what you said, but to make this interesting, I'm just going to say, yep, he's gone this year for something.
You got to roll the dice. You got to take that chance. And when we look back on it this year, at least one of us can say that we're right? We can say that Unparliamentary Language as a podcast was right about this prediction. So no, I respect that move.
But yeah, I mean, I think I don't disagree with anything you've said necessarily, but I feel like a bad version of the Sue Gray report is enough reason to get rid of him personally. So yeah, I think that's where it lies. So yeah, I'm just going to say it. I think he's going to go. We're getting closer because it's 2024, right? The next general election. So we're kind of, I know we're just at the start of 2022, so it sounds like it's only 2 years away. It's a bit, there's all of 2022 and then all of 2023, and then it would kind of be part way into 2024, I guess. So it is, we are like the halfway point now.
It'd be 5 years. It would be Christmas. We'd have another Christmassy election if they did the Fixed Term Parliament Act.
Yes, exactly. So the general speculation I've seen is that if they got rid of him now, they'd have a bit of chance to build up someone else and be like, oh, well, all the bad stuff was Boris and his friends. I'm a new Conservative leader. Try and do that usual distancing thing that politicians do. and then possibly call an early general election if that affects the polls positively for them. If not, try and spend all of that run up to the general election improving their standing in the polls and see how that goes. But I think they could probably do a decent job of deflecting a lot of the problems as Boris and not as the Conservatives, even though I personally disagree with that. So next, we've got three big parties and we're a third of the way through. So Labour's up next. Didn't have much of a prediction here. We said we thought Keir would keep agreeing with the government on COVID measures. I mean, fundamentally, yes, I would say. I mean, like, that's been a big criticism of him in that he's generally been saying yes, but more, please.
Yeah, and he has, and to the extent that when Plan B was proposed in December and the Conservative MPs rebelled against Boris, Keir Starmer was the one supporting public health measures to make sure that they could get through and pass through government. So I think that Keir and Labour have been fairly consistent in their supporting of those stricter health measures when they have come to the government. They've done nothing controversial and refused the government any of those big COVID measures. Maybe if it was maybe if the Conservatives said, hey, I need to vote through this PPE contract, give to my mate, that's the kind of stuff that Keir Starmer's been bringing up and has been most sort of like anti the government when it comes to the way that they've handled the COVID-19 pandemic at the moment. But when it comes to the measures themselves, he's been broadly supportive. And I don't see him going away from that unless the government starts to get... The government wouldn't need to vote it through, though. Like, it's weird. Like, the government needs to vote through stricter restrictions. They don't need to vote through the lifting of those restrictions. So Labour might disagree and feel that the government is not taking enough action against COVID, but it will never come to a vote in the House anyway. So yeah, I think we were fairly right on that one and may continue to be right in that prediction.
The next one, though, we've already kind of tackled. We thought Keir Starmer might tackle Brexit a bit, but mostly ignore it. I guess he's totally ignored it, pretty much. Like, that's his strategy.
Yeah. I think the only one to bring it up in the House of Commons in P&Qs is kind of like Boris Johnson mentioning it and mentioning like, oh, Keir Starmer used to support X, Y, or Z, and Keir Starmer boldly not responding to the question at all and asking Boris Johnson something else entirely. And yeah, I think that's going to continue, barring Article 16 being revoked. Keir Starmer will probably ignore that problem because it was a big problem for the Labour Party, and the more he ignores it, the more it isn't a problem for the Labour Party. So he's just hoping that it goes away quietly.
Yeah. I think, yeah, like we said, it's not going to score him big points, bringing up his previous, stance on Brexit. So I can understand why he wants to let that kind of be buried. So not much on Labour last year. Do we have more things to predict this year? There's not. Let me double check. There's not any known by-elections coming up, is there?
I don't believe so. No. They've got the same like local elections as the Conservatives, so which are based in and around London mostly. They actually had an incredible result in 2018 when those were last done, with sort of Brexit still being a thing and London being a very heavily Remain area and Labour standing for that, or at least having a very a very London-centric leader in Corbyn. They did quite well in the metropolitan areas last time, and I think they will probably expect to continue that success.
I mean, London has not suddenly become more conservative, really, I don't think. I mean, it was closer than we expected during the mayoral election, but given how the overall national polling levels are right now for the Conservatives, I imagine that would be reflected in local elections. Don't think I get to do anything for those. I think that's a year where it skips me because we did like our local council stuff when we did the mayor as well. So I think for me, it's kind of like I can watch other parts of London, but I always forget. I always get these mixed up. There's more elections than you think.
Yes, there tend to be local elections like every year, but kind of done in thirds, so that they do come in waves. But I think those election nights, I don't expect will be particularly like damaging for Keir Starmer. In fact, if he's able to, if the Conservatives have an awful night and Labour are the ones that come out on top, then he might be able to claim it as a win. I think the one thing that maybe is worrying for Keir Starmer going into 2022 is that even though Keir Starmer did a big speech at the start of this year, sort of outlining his vision, the problem is that it was kind of overawed by other things. It was a speech I didn't really pay attention to. I certainly don't think the nation paid attention to. So Keir Starmer's vision is maybe still not as clear, even when he tries to go on TV and announce what that vision is, which is a slight worry for the Labour Party. The other worry is that he's not picking up the people who are saying that they won't vote Conservative at the moment aren't immediately going back over to Labour. Those people tend to say that they are abstaining or moving either to the Lib Dems or like almost a protest vote for the Greens. If Keir Starmer wants to, be in a really strong position for the next election going into the Conservatives, he needs to work out a way to persuade those floating voters that they can come back to the Labour Party. That's got to be his big thing for 2022, and seeing if he can now maintain this lead that he's got in the polls of 10 points. I think that lead will probably slowly ebb away because we're right in the midst of the crisis at the moment. I feel like the most anger and passionate feeling about what Boris had done was probably yesterday on Wednesday, and even now as the cabinet ministers are saying their lines and we're waiting for Sue Gray, people's feelings tend to temper out in time. But those are Keir's goals, to try and maintain that poll lead and have a successful election. And I think he will, but I do think that poll lead will get smaller and smaller. And maybe by the end of 2022, I can see the Conservatives and Labour being level pegging, even if Boris Johnson still is in charge.
Yeah, I think one thing I might note as well is we're about to move on to the Lib Dems as well. Like we mentioned earlier when we briefly touched on the polls, that Lib Dems have been taking away from the Conservatives recently. So I think there is a chance, given the Lib Dems generally do well in local elections anyway, that it might be some Conservative local authorities moving over to Lib Dems instead of to Labour. So may not be as big gains as Labour would hope. The other thing I'm going to say right now is I don't foresee Keir having something that would take him out of the leadership role this year.
Yeah, you know what, I agree. You remember when there was, previously when we were talking about Brexit and other things going on and turmoil, the other turmoil that seemed to be happening was the Labour Party and MPs versus Jeremy Corbyn. And he was certainly, although he was he was a figure that got a lot of passion from the base, he was also one that divided opinion and meant that always the Labour leadership was kind of like there was a question mark over that. Keir's kind of, has cemented himself as the leader of Labour in the short term, and I don't think that he's in any danger of going before the next general election, unless Sue Gray suddenly finds some dirt on him instead. I think Keir's got that sewn up for the time being.
Yeah, and I mean, it would have to be a really bad local election result for him to be kicked out, I think that's the position he's in. Whether 2023 Labour starts to consider, I think there's probably a more general thing we can talk about without, outside of the scope of a predictions episode about, will Keir Starmer be the person who goes into a general election? I don't know, but I'm not going to make a prediction on that because I think that's probably a 2023 problem as far as the Labour Party is concerned. So moving next on to the Lib Dems, the third party. And last year we said we think the Lib Dems have become irrelevant because they were very fighting over Brexit, and then Brexit was going to disappear. And turns out we were actually very wrong. I believe we posted an episode with Ed Davey knocking down a big blue wall for the Tories with a mallet. A lot of good by-election news for them this year. So we were wrong.
Yeah, I'm happy in a way that we were wrong about that. Last year I was really struggling to see the Lib Dems' unique selling point, their USP, where they were going to go after Brexit and how they could convey themselves as a party. And even though I don't think Ed Davey has done anything in particular, if you told me what Ed Davey stands for, I don't think I could reel off a list of things that he particularly, his particular policy ideas that are breaking through with people. What the Lib Dems do appear to be, though, is a home for people who were voting Conservatives economically, but might be a little bit cautious about their social conservatism. Now Boris Johnson has had a number of faux pas, as we've discussed before, and might be taking the party further to the right in that way. You've got some constituents who are like, no, I'm not happy with that, and I feel that although I'm not able to lend my vote to Labour yet, I feel that the Lib Dems are the party that I will vote for instead of the Conservatives, in order to send a message to Boris Johnson, or maybe just because they feel that the Lib Dems are their natural political home now. And it's been incredibly successful. Like you said, those two by-election victories where Conservatives would previously have said that this was an easy seat to hold and not really campaign it, they've had historic losses. And some of that has been through a lot of tactical voting. I think there are some people who would have voted Labour who saw that the Lib Dems had a chance to unseat a Conservative and embarrass Boris Johnson. Therefore, for the purposes of a by-election, they'll lend their vote to a Lib Dem MP, and that's seen tremendous results. And as you say, with the local council elections, that's another thing that the Lib Dems do extraordinarily well. They tend to not perform so well in like general national elections, but when it comes to those targeted local campaigns on local issues, and if they feel that they're usually quite targeted in where they use their funds, if they really feel that they can have an impact in an area, they will put their heart and soul into it, and usually because of that they'll be able to convey to those local voters that they are working harder than the local and conservative candidates who are just they're rocking up because they've got to go everywhere. That's what they do. They're the two main parties. They've got to show up everywhere. But the Lib Dems are like, no, we're here and we will fight for your local rights. So yes, even without Brexit, even I think without like a major policy change from Ed Davey, they are still an incredibly important political force at the moment, particularly for taking votes away from the Conservatives and putting them into that third party. And I believe that will just give like my prediction for 2022 in this statement as well. I think that will continue into this year, and certainly in any by-elections and local elections, they are a party to watch out for, particularly if it is a Conservative Lib Dem marginal, and there are more than those around than you think, particularly in the more rural constituencies. That's where they will smash that blue wall, as Ed Davey literally did. Which I might also say as a side, Lib Dems will also not stop being incredibly cringe. Like they will.
I think that's a fair bet.
They will do something incredible, like unseat a Conservative MP who's been in that seat for 150 years, and then ruin it by feeling the need to burst a big blue bubble on television. And it's just, Lib Dems, why'd you do it every time? Stick to your bar graphs.
Yeah. No, that sounds about right to me. And just reiterating what I said in the Labour section, I think they might do better in local elections than people might expect, I guess. I don't really know where the bar for that is. I think they're going to do decently in the local elections, and like you say, in marginal Conservative Lib Dem seats or council seats or whatever the particular things are that are being voted on in that election, because I don't have time to look it up right now. I think they will do pretty well, because it looks like they're polling that way right now, and unless the Conservatives do something serious to turn things around, that's where some of those less, not born and bred Conservative voters, that's where they tend to go instead of to Labour. So, next up, we had Scotland. We had two predictions here. So Scotland to push for independence. I don't think I've actually, I know it's a common undercurrent in like stories about Scotland, but I don't think I've really heard anything about this year. I'd say the most common thing I've heard about Scotland is how they're doing COVID regularly.
Yeah. And I think it was another big part of it. In the podcast last year, we said we're going to ignore the Lib Dems because the real third party is the SNP, who have been dealing with COVID very differently. And I feel that they'll have more of an impact on British politics this year. But I feel that they've kind of just been lost in the mix entirely. That prediction for Scotland to push, or the SNP in particular, to push for independence, polling tends to go up and down, and has been sort of 1 month it'll be 55 for yes and 45 for no, and the next month it'll be the opposite way round. So that struggle between, should Scotland go for independence, yes or no, will continue, and I think will continue to continue. Maybe I need a different word. will carry on into 2022, as Nicola Sturgeon has already said that she will push for another referendum this year. Not that I think the Conservatives are going to give that to her, but it doesn't look like they're going away. As well, we said that Scotland might be like more in the news, but again, I think we were proved wrong. There was I had to look this up. There was an election for MSPs in 2021, which at one point this year I thought, I swear we'll probably do a podcast on that, and I'll have to investigate Scottish politics, and there might be a big change. In fact, not much went on. The SNP gained 2 seats, so the status quo is kind of maintained. It's clear that the SNP continue their nearly 20-year hold on Scottish politics of being uniquely in charge of that devolved assembly, and that doesn't look like it's going to go away anytime soon. So yes, again, this third party section, although I thought we did okay with some others, has a big L. Yeah, big L for the Lib Dems, and a big over-egging of how much the SNP were going to have an impact. So I'm happy to reverse my predictions for 2022 at the same point.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything in particular to add. The SNP have just come out of an election and stuff. I don't think anything's really going to change in the short term. I think people are generally, like, there was stuff going on with like investigations over things, but that all seems to have kind of finished, is my impression. Maybe it's more talked about in Scotland, but like in our news, it's kind of more, the most you tend to see at the moment is, oh, their coronavirus restrictions are stricter than ours. That's basically the Scottish news we're getting down here. And it feels kind of different from like 6 months ago, when I feel like there was a bit more talk about like how Scotland were doing things a bit. But I was also up in Scotland at the time, so that does slightly affect your viewpoint. So our next major topic, and it's our final topic, so don't worry if you've held on with this to this point. USA. So made a few predictions. I think the first one, fairly easy one that we predicted. We felt that Biden would follow COVID advice more than Trump, and 100%. Like, from day one, he was like, everyone's going to wear masks, etc., etc. So, I think that was an easy win, an easy prediction when we said it. But yeah, tick. But Biden listens to experts. That's the big difference. One of many big differences between him and Trump, I guess.
Yeah. So the next point we said was that we felt that at the time there were still 2 seats to be decided in the Senate, both in Georgia, and we were fairly pessimistic and thought realistically it was unlikely that they would win both of those seats. We thought they might win one. In the end, it was the fact that Democrats did win both, and they were able to gain control of the Senate, and that meant that it went to 50 Democrats to 50 Republicans, and the vice president who can break the tie. And because of that reason, we felt that Biden wouldn't be able to get many major reforms through Congress. As it is, even though he got that majority, he really has still continued to fail to get any big reforms through Congress, as it remains quite a divided House. We had quite a go at Trump for his inability to make the most of the 2 years where he had a united House and Senate, because you really have to, when you win, that's when Obama pushed things through, like Obamacare, because he knew that was his one chance to get big, where he had the numbers to get big policies through. All Biden has really managed for this year is he's managed a big coronavirus relief effort. I believe he's been able to sort of put like $1 billion back into infrastructure, but some of his big projects like Build Back Better have entirely stalled within the House, as well as some of his proposals for voting reform. And where some people felt that Biden would be a president who could talk across the aisle far more than Trump, it was a big criticism of Trump that there was like, he's going to get no Democrats crossing the aisle for Trump because he is so divisive. Maybe Biden is the one who has worked within that situation for so long that he can convince a couple of Republicans to come along. I think that we are still seeing quite a polarized House and Senate with nobody willing to walk away from their tribes, and that makes it all the more difficult for any real change to happen within America that seems to be stuck in a bit of a quagmire at the moment, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think we put down they wouldn't get control of the Senate, and that we were wrong on that. But fundamentally, the stalemate that's been going on in Congress has meant that was functionally useless, I guess. And then the other thing we predicted was that Trump wouldn't attend the inauguration. We were correct on that. But obviously the thing we couldn't predict was January 6th, which, was a complete shock to everyone, I think. Even in hindsight, it still seems like amazing that happened this year. Like, yeah, it's kind of hard to look back on. I recently listened to, I'll probably put a link in the show notes to the, there was like a 1-year retrospective from Americast from the BBC on it. And it was interesting. I think that's an episode worth listening to, because it kind of talks about like people are being indicted and stuff over sedition right now. A friend recently just shared a Twitter thread on that of someone who's being indicted. But there has been, I think there was a lot more expectation for the kind of standard Republican, for the Republicans who have always been there in the House, kind of coming out and condemning that more than there were. And that just didn't happen. So I think it's kind of interesting that that's been allowed to sit in the way it has. Biden came up very strongly against it at the year anniversary, but I think some damage has been done there to the state of American democracy that will take some time to heal from. It wasn't like the healing moment people thought it would be, but obviously we couldn't predict that because it hadn't happened yet. Yeah.
So predictions for 2022, I guess, when it comes to Biden. I know we haven't really talked much about America this year. We didn't talk about much about America in 2021 because there wasn't a madman in charge who we thought could do anything at any second. So in a way, it was nice to just sort of have a more like relaxed year. But I did have do a bit more of research to see what's going on there. It appears that the general mood now is that Biden is not a particularly popular president. I think his approval is hovering around 40 to 45%, which is kind of equivalent to Trump, which shows that it's still quite like a nation divided. If you voted for Trump, you're unlikely to have go across the aisle if you're a voter as well to Biden. And there are those on the left who feel that, Biden has been unable to do anything significant. Therefore, he was elected in on the platform of not being Donald Trump. And boy, has he not been Donald Trump, but he's also not done anything spectacular. And that's hard to whip up your base when you haven't done much at all. That Virginia governor race that happened in 2021 that the Democrats lost quite badly in an area where they had been doing quite well while Trump was in charge puts really big warning signs for how they're going to perform in the midterms. Particularly, they might lose the House or the Senate or both as a result of there being quite an apathetic Democratic reaction. And some people felt that Biden's recent State of the Union address was an attempt to kind of whip up some fervor amongst the Democrats to kind of remind them that, hey, if we don't win, you'll let, there are still very Trumpy people around, and actually the GOP is more Trumpy than ever. That specter hasn't gone as a result of that, and that's why you need to get fired up about it and vote for me in 2022. But yes, I am predicting a tough year for Joe Biden. And if the midterms do go very wrong, then maybe you're thinking, much the way that we're thinking, can Boris Johnson survive if he has a bad council election? If Joe Biden at his age, with what he's been able to do, and if they have a disastrous midterm, it might be he might be one of those one-term presidents where you think that, he can't be a viable candidate going into 2024. But that's looking down the line quite a bit, and that's a very big future prediction there.
Yeah, I think it's a bit too much of a stretch to go for 2024, but I think I'm going to take the current read of what I'm hearing, which is, we were hoping, I guess there was a hope that the kind of Trumpianness would help split the Republicans a bit, and that there would still be very pro-Trump people, but the kind of, as I say, the standard Republicans would also oppose things. There was a good article shared, I think we both saw earlier in the week, about the Republicans are pushing for loading the various legislatures so that they can change election rules and stuff before 2024, which I think is kind of a more general concern about, how well the Republicans have kind of locked down that stuff. And there's been a few podcasts about their strategies that they used pre-Trump, which makes it easier for Republicans to get elected in some states, especially in some of the battleground states. But we've talked before about how the Democrats tend to win the popular vote and still lose due to both the Electoral College and other things. And it seems like the Republicans know how to play that game very well. Democrats should be well aware of that. If just random people on a podcast can point out this is a problem, they should know about that. The question is whether they act on it. I get the impression that they need another big blow to shake them out of things. So I'm going to go with a prediction that the overall tally of the midterms is bad for the Democrats. That only has to be two things the wrong way, I guess, for them. But I think they're going to do badly in the midterms. That's what I'm going to go for. I'm not going to predict forward to 2024. People are talking about Trump coming back for an attempt at a second term. It's going to be messy, I think. Overall, would be the only thing I could say. But yeah, I guess we're going to have to keep our eyes peeled on the US. And I thought we were going to touch on them a bit more this year, because with the run up to the midterms, there's going to be more stuff to talk about. So we will talk about them more. That is a definite promise. So yeah, that'll happen because we're in charge of that. Excellent. Well, there we have a whole pile of predictions for the next year and a review of last year's. Been kind of a long episode. I hope you enjoyed this being one joint episode as opposed to being split out over two. I don't know if that's easier for people. Let us know. You can do that on Twitter at Unparl Podcast, on Instagram at Unparl Podcast, on Facebook as Unparliamentary Language, on Reddit at /r/unparliamentary. And of course, you can come and join us on patreon.com/TTSS, where you can throw a few dollars our way, support what we do. And in return, you get bonus content like Rob and I talking about our New Year's and things like that. So, if you want to know what we're like outside of just the standard topic of the podcast, that's for you. I also still owe an example episode that I'm going to put on the main feed sometime between this episode and next, I guess. But I just haven't had the time to edit it because work has been a lot. But yeah, I think that's everything. I'm just going to throw in one quick update that happened while we were recording. Came out at 9:24 p.m. So late news breaking on our headlines from earlier. Apparently, Downing Street staff were drinking into the early hours at Leaving Dues the night before Prince Philip's funeral. So that was in 2021. And the picture the Telegraph have shared with that article is a picture of the Queen on her own in, I think it's Westminster Abbey, at the funeral. So yeah, this story keeps coming for the Conservatives breaking their own rules. So
I'm just reading that as well. We have spoken to eyewitnesses at a leaving do for a number 10 photographer. It is alleged that staff partied in the basement of number 10 to music DJ'd by a special advisor. One broke Wilf Johnson's swing in the number 10 garden. Another was sent to the co-op with a suitcase to buy booze. So yeah, not a great look for number 10, but again, it's like, that's number 10 staff. Is it Boris Johnson? Clearly paints Boris Johnson in a bad light if those are the people that he's choosing to surround himself with. But unless there is a photograph of Boris Johnson on his son's swing, breaking it with a bottle of champagne in his hand, it might be harder to pin it exactly on him.
Yeah, no, I understand, but it's stuff like that coming out. It's going to be a big deal. And, I think, it's telling that's in the Telegraph, right? They're generally quite conservative. The nickname for that paper is the Tory Graph, if you're not aware. So, them playing on that angle with the Queen, that there's a certain type of voter who will react to that. And I think that's probably not going to be good for the Conservatives in the short term. But yeah, there you go. Breaking news as we finish the episode. I don't think there's anything else left for me to say other than it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him. Bye.
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 Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye. Bye. Join Mike and Tom for nerdy conversation with a multitude of guests on Hat of Many Things.
Say hi, guys.
Hi, guys.
Hello.
I'm Mark, a librarian and professional wrestling ring announcer.
I cast League of Legends.
Soteros Philbricato, best known for my work with White Wolf and Onyx Path Publishing on the World of Darkness.
Hi, I'm Jason Carl. I'm the producer of V5 at White Wolf.
Yeah, my name is Johanna Pettersson, a Finnish game designer.